Be sure to subscribe for your chance to win a custom leather playmat when we hit 2,500 subscribers. Here we are with the set review for all the blue cards in Zendikar Rising, starting out with Anti-Cognition, a 2-mana counterspell that can counter a creature or planeswalker unless they pay 2, and if opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead you can counter it and scry 2. So not only will it become a hard counter, but you'll actually get scrying as well, which is phenomenal. Like a 2-mana counter spell that lets you scry 2, very, very good. It's probably a lot harder to get that condition than you might think. There's going to be a lot of games where that's just a mana leak, though the good news is that does play along the line of control. So in the early game, the fact that it's able to just counter a spell because they won't have 2 mana available, and then later on in the game, it ends up becoming potentially better if it does progress to that game state. Means that this card, I would be surprised if it doesn't see like standard play, for example. Bellingham Veil, 2 mana, creatures your opponent control get -2, -0 till end of turn. Solid combat trick. Can definitely make a massacre of, an alpha strike where you're just turning all your guys sideways. And the fact that it can come in as a land as well does offset the fact that that type of effect is sometimes underwhelming. So worst case scenario, you're getting a land, and best case scenario, it's an absolute blowout. This type of card is very interesting for limited, and again, probably going to be playable. Bubble Snare, I really like this card. 1 blue, you can kick it, and if you kick it, then you tap the creature. Otherwise, the creature just doesn't untap. Most of the time in limited, the creatures that you're handling are going to be ones that are attacking you anyway. So the ability to just slap this on, that pesky 2-power or 3-power flyer and just get it out of the way permanently is really, really impressive. And the kicker is very manageable at 4 mana. So overall, I think this is probably going to be some pretty good removal at common. Cascade Seer, 4 mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you're scrying X, where X is your party. So potentially a scry 4 for 4 with a 3/3 body. This card seems totally fine. Worst case scenario, you're scrying 1 in most instances, as it is itself a wizard. Charix, the Raging Island. Look at those stats. 0/17. This 4 casting cost, 17 toughness creature. Spells your opponent cast that target him cost 2 more to cast, making him a little bit more awkward to try and deal with, though they're not going to be dealing with him for damage. And you can pay 3 to give him +X, -X, where X is the number of islands you control. So really interesting card. I think people are going to have fun with this because of the flavor. I guess we'll see. We'll see how good it is in limited. I mean, if you have like 3 or 4 islands, he's just a huge backside. But you do need to invest the mana every turn. So I'm not super excited about this guy. Maybe in mono blue, even then you're going to have some non-islands in your mana base potentially. So I don't know. This one's really cool. I get a little bit of a Moana vibe out of this with that big singing crab. No, I am not going to produce his name. Not going to happen. Let me know in the comments. But I'm pretty sure we'll see some alters with him on there. Chilling Trap, another 1 mana potential removal spell here for blue. -4, -0 until end of turn. And if you have a wizard, draw a card. I mean, this one feels pauper playable to me. I could see this going alongside Delver of Secrets, drawing a card, and potentially fogging if they're getting attacked by, some 4-power creature, or even better, entering a combat situation where they're just losing, all for 1 mana and draw a card. I mean, I think this one's actually quite good. Cleric of Chill Depths, 2 mana, 1/3. Whenever it blocks a creature, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. I'm not super excited about this one. The 1 power really just means this is a super defensive card. And I mean, I feel like this probably just drags out your losing. Probably, you can like block their 4/4 and then it doesn't untap. I mean, I'm not digging this one. Concerted Defense, 1 mana, counter target non-creature spell unless they pay 1, plus an additional 1 for your party. So potentially 5 mana that they have to pay. This card, counter spells in limited are dicey. You have to have them at the right time. The decks aren't as smooth as you'd really want them to be. I get that some people really enjoy building counter-heavy decks for pre-releases. I've always just tried to win them, and I don't think that's a particularly effective way to win in limited, but some players really just get a kick out of countering every important thing that their opponent attempts to do, and this one might line up for you. 1 mana counters are not the worst in terms of trying to keep your mana open. At least you don't have to sit there with 3 or 4 mana open. You can potentially pass the turn with this, and it could signal any number of things with the 1 mana spells we've seen so far. Confounding Conundrum. It's a big title. We recently did a Pack Wars where the pack that had the card with the most characters in a name won. And this one looks like it would be a contender for this set. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and when a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield they control this turn, then they return a land they control to its owner's hand. So this is awkward for fetch lands. You're going to have to fetch on your opponent's turn, which is potentially fine. I mean, it shuts down some shenanigans. I think it probably plays well with things like Ghost Quarters, Assassin's Trophy, that type of stuff. But, I mean, that feels more like EDH shenanigans than something that we'll see as like an actual constructed approach to mana denial. Coralhelm Chronicler, 2 and a blue for a 2/2. Whenever you cast a kick spell, you draw and then discard. And when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 of your library and you can reveal a card with the kicker and put it into your hand, rest on the bottom. It's a solid card. Turns your kickers into draw engines and also replaces itself. This one, you'll be very pleased to sleeve up during the pre-release. The ability to, as long as you've got enough kickers in your deck, to be able to use that as a draw engine is really strong. And there's some good cards with kickers, very often worth paying as well. Here we've got a Cunning Geyser Mage. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you can return a creature to its owner's hand. That is a really heavy mana cost for this, but the effect is good. I mean, a 3-power creature for 3 is fine, and then the fact that you can be bouncing something is totally fine. We've paid as low as like 3 mana for this effect before. We'll see if at 6 mana it's still good enough, but the bottom line is the ability of this is very good. Like Flame Tongue Kavu effects, where like you're playing a creature, getting something on board that's like a legitimate threat, and also getting rid of something off of your opponent's board, is pretty solid. We've got Deliberate here. Scry 2, then draw a card. Instant speed preordained for 1 more. Probably going to be playable in Standard. I mean, we've got the Omen there, the blue Omen from Theros Beyond Death, which is seeing play. So if your deck has more synergy with instants and sorceries than it does enchantments, then this one might potentially get the nod. Expedition Diviner, 4 mana for a 3/2. As long as you have another wizard, he has, when this creature dies, draw a card, and it's also a flyer. I mean, this guy is also totally fine for limited. 4 mana, 3 power flying is solid, and the fact that he gets a replacement effect when he dies is welcome. I mean, when your opponent's using removal on this guy, it's going to feel pretty bad for them. Field Research. At 3 mana, we're going to draw 2, and if it was kicked for an additional 3, you draw 3 cards instead. Sorcery Speed? I don't know. I mean, 3 mana to draw 2 at Sorcery Speed is a card that they've reprinted a ton of times. The upside's nice. You know, if you're flooded out, like it's pretty nice to be able to get an extra card out of this. It's too bad it doesn't turn into an instant with the kicker. You know what I mean? Like, the timing on that would be really complicated from a rules perspective. But yeah, I think this one is probably not. I mean, it's not going to be an embarrassing 23rd card or 22nd card in your pre-release pool, but I don't know. We'll see if this is actually something that you're going to ever be kicking and happy about it. Glacial Grasp. Moments like that I wish I edited these videos. For 3 mana, we're going to tap a creature. They mill 2, and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, and you draw a card. I like it. Again, like I like cards that draw cards. I like it when it happens at instant speed, and for pre-release and limited, I like it when it affects the board. So this kind of does a lot of things that I like. I don't know what to think of milling in this format. We'll see if there's enough support for it. I'm finding out in real time here as we go through every single blue card, and we'll see if there's any other support in other colors. But overall, this is, again, not a card that I'd be embarrassed to be sleeving up. Glasspool Mimic, 2 in a blue. It's a shapeshifter rogue. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature, except it's also a shapeshifting rogue. It has to be a creature you control, so not the best clone effect a lot of the time. I mean, certainly if you have multiple clone effects and in your hand and no other creatures on board and your opponent has a bunch of creatures, that feels absolutely awful. But this will probably be a lot of fun for Commander, and the fact that it can come into play as a land means that, like a mono blue Commander deck, probably going to rather run this than, its 25th island. Inscription of Insight, 4 mana with a huge kicker of 4 more, so we can be paying 8 mana for this effect. Now, if you don't pay the kicker, you're getting one of these. If you do the kicker, you can do as many as you want. You can return up to 2 creatures to their owner's hand. You can scry 2, then draw 2, and you can have a player create an XX illusion, where X is the number of cards in their hand. So very, very powerful. This is overall, I mean, all of the modes are pretty solid. And if you are flooded out, I mean, the fact that you're going to be getting a big body that is even bigger because of the card draw and returning 2 creatures to their own opponent's hand, most likely you're returning your opponent's creatures, but, you could be returning some things with enter the battlefield abilities on your side and then getting an even bigger illusion. So I think people are going to have a lot of fun with this card, and it seems totally fine. Into the Royal. Very, very solid card. Saw constructed play originally. 2 mana unsummon is a little pricey, but the kicker really is where it makes it interesting, where you can potentially return a creature, or non-land permanent for that matter, and draw a card, and that is actually totally fine at that mana cost. Jace Mirror Mage. This is a card a lot of people were excited about. At 3 mana, 4 loyalty, and he's going to +1 to scry, and also use 0 to draw a card and reveal it. Remove the number of loyalty counters equal to the card's converted mana cost from Jace. So kind of like a Dark Confidant effect for the Jace. So you're revealing lands, he's going to be good to go forever. If you're revealing cards that cost more, it's going to get dangerous. And the upside here is if you do reveal something really big, I mean, he's going away, but, that's potentially fine. Now, the other side of this is if you kick it, you get a copy of Jace Mirror Mage, except that it's not legendary and it has a starting loyalty of 1. So you can start ticking that guy up, scry, and then use that to draw with this and make sure that your planeswalkers are not going away too quickly. And, of course, over time, that other Jace can start drawing cards as well. So I think this card's going to play really well. I think it'll be fun to use in limited at 3 mana. I don't think that's embarrassing. And certainly if you can get this down like on the play on turn 3 and your opponent doesn't have a 2-drop, it's going to be pretty bad for them. Like, that's going to be a real problem to be able to get this out uncontested and just be able to just have premium, not only card advantage, but card quality for the rest of the game. Juari Disruption, 2 mana for a Force Spike, is certainly more than you want to spend. Usually we don't want to spend any mana on that effect. Daze is a premier card and Legacy and Vintage. And here, this one, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't think it's going to be very good. You can probably play it in Commander, but again, like 1 mana, like how often are they actually tapping out? Maybe the threat of this would make people not play their Genesis Wave or whatever for quite so much, which is a little bit of an upside, but counter spell unless they pay 1, and it can come in as a land. This one doesn't have me super excited. I'd be happy to be wrong, but we'll see how that one plays out. Living Tempest, 5 mana, 3/3 flying flash. I love this type of card. This can ambush block a 2/2 creature, get some creature removal out of it, and then also be a legitimate threat in the air. That is the type of card that I like quite a bit. The only thing that I can really complain about there is the casting cost at 5 mana is a bit much, but not at all out of line with the value on the card. Lull Mage's Domination. Triple blue is an awful big ask for anything other than mono blue, so expect this to see some play in Commander, even in an uncommon. I think this is an interesting card, and stealing your opponent's creatures, you can never really get too much of it. There are better options, of course, Treachery, stealing a creature and untapping lands, potentially generating mana, but if you're really greedy and you want all of the creatures, I can definitely see this seeing play, especially in a big ramp blue deck, to be able to steal creatures. And the costing 3 less, I mean, at that point, you're basically just stealing a creature for 3 blue, which is totally fine if you do have that condition. But again, those type of effects tend to be much better when the condition is on you compared to your opponent. So if it said for you to get 8 cards into your graveyard, you could build your deck in a way that continually and successfully makes that happen. Whereas when it's your opponent, that's something that they can actively play against. And, in the world of Euro, this is going to be very, very difficult to make this kind of come together when you've got, Euro constantly exiling cards for his escape. Maddening Cacophony. 2 mana. Each opponent mills 8. If it was kicked, instead, each opponent mills half of their library. So this is going to be more expensive than Traumatize, but this is each opponent. So I think people are going to love this in Commander. And, I would expect people to be, what is it? Definitely twin cast. There's a bunch of ways you can fork this that I think people will have a lot of fun with. And yeah, it's a rare, so you can't really build around this in limited. Getting rid of half of the cards in someone's library doesn't really do very much. I guess we'll do a quick aside on that. So a lot of the time when people are starting out playing in tournaments, even something like a pre-release, the idea of getting rid of half of your opponent's cards in their library is a big deal. Now, I don't want to discount all of those cards that say if your opponent has 8 or more cards, because this is certainly relevant to that discussion, but aside from that, if you're just milling your opponent 8, or in the case of actually, it's probably not that much more. This is just bad design. If it's 8 cards, so they'd have to have at least 16 cards left in their library, and that's 24 minus 7 is 17. So yeah, you're gonna kick this for a little bit of value, and potentially get more cards milled. But anyways, I don't know if you guys followed my thinking there. My point that I was just grappling with is whether or not milling 8 or making half of their cards go away is going to be better. At what point is the trade-off? And it's not the best. For the most part, this is probably just going to be 2 mana in limited to mill 8 cards. That's probably going to be enough. But also in limited, if you were to take the top 20 cards of your opponent's library and put them in the graveyard, or take the top 20 cards of their library and put it on the bottom of their library, not really that different, unless they actually run out of cards. If they're going to actually lose from not being able to draw, then that's a huge difference. It's very similar to throwing burn at your opponent's face when they're at 20 life. Like if you just open up with lightning bolt to the face, go, like, unless you're playing the deck literally burn, where it's just all burn spells, and even that's not a good opening for that deck. Like, you really want to be throwing burn at someone's face when it's actually going to be killing them. Other than that, it's usually better for killing their creatures and then using your creatures to do the damage. It's just a more efficient way to make it happen. So milling your opponent, unless you actually win the game with it, is actually terrible. And that's part of the thing that makes it fun, is when it comes together, it's a blast. But just keep that in mind, is, if you're taking cards off the top of their deck, you're just as likely to get them closer to their game-winning bomb than you are to get rid of it. If they've got some mythic rare that you're really worried about, it doesn't really matter if you're playing this card. It doesn't actually change things very much. And there are a couple of things that can kind of refute that, if we're talking about things that can bring creatures back from graveyards or things like that. And of course, the synergy with having 8 cards in their graveyard. But overall, I think this will be a lot of fun for Commander players who are looking to have some goofy mill strategies. But aside from that, you can't really count on building around that in Limited. Master of Winds, 4 mana for a 1/4 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 and then discard. And whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard, you can have its base power and toughness become either 4/1 or 1/4 until end of turn. What's not to like here? The only thing to not like is if you don't have instants and sorceries or wizard spells, then this thing's just a 1/4 flyer, which is not super exciting. But if you have enough of those effects in your deck, you're potentially smashing for 4 in the air every time. And it's also going to allow you to draw 2 and then discard a card, which it seems like blue is probably going to be happier discarding its lands and holding onto its spells than getting those landfall triggers. So that is historically how blue is played. When you're taking a look at cards like Merfolk Looter, for example, which was one of the stronger draft cards in general, is just the ability to have this 2 casting cost creature that just keeps improving your hand every time. So I think this card's decent. Let's say it's decent. It's going to be more difficult to pull off and Limited to have that constant stream of instant sorceries and wizards, but there's definitely sufficient upside to not be embarrassed leaving that card up. Merfolk Falconer, 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer. Whenever you cast a kick spell, scry 2. Again, getting those extra lands out of the way. This seems totally fine. 4/4 flying for 5 is historically pretty good in Limited. I think Sarah Angel, one of the best Limited cards of all time. There's certainly a tier above her when we're talking about things like Umezawa's Jite and stuff, but just in general, cards that you can be pretty excited about in Limited, 4/4 flyers for 5 have been in the conversation. Merfolk Wind Robber, a 1 mana, 1/1 flying rogue. When this one deals combat damage to a player, they mill 1 card, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card only if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So a 1/1 flyer that just mills 1 a turn. It's an uncommon. People are going to have fun trying to make it work, perhaps. I don't think they're going to win very much with it. If it was a common and you could potentially get a squad of like 5 of these, maybe that could potentially be enough. But just milling 1 a turn is not overwhelming. And we'll see. I do like the clause that you can sack it to draw a card. That is pretty nice upside down the line when your opponent finally has to waste removal on this potentially. But it's not going to be too difficult to get something with wings in front of this 1/1. And at that point, your fun is probably over. Negate. This is a classic. And I like the composition. I like the blue and the red. That's some nice contrast. Counter target non-creature spell. What is there to say? I think in Limited, if you know that your opponent has some bombs that absolutely have to be answered, some type of like sorceries that are just the mythic sorceries that are just going to blow you out, this is not an embarrassing card to have to handle those. But aside from that, I don't know that I actually main deck this card. Let me know if you disagree with that, but overall, most of the really good stuff is going to be creatures. The best stuff is going to be creature removal, but you're not always going to be able to keep the mana open, and if you're not using your mana effectively each turn, that is a huge problem. Every turn that you pass with mana open in limited, if you can't use that mana before your next turn, I mean, you are digging in the wrong direction. Nimble Trap Finder, 2 mana, 2/1 human rogue, can't be blocked if you had another cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard enter the battlefield this turn. So anytime a party member enters, you're going to be able to have an unblockable threat here. And at the beginning of your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control gain whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card until end of turn. So you've got an unblockable for 2, which is fine. Good. Two mana for a 2-power unblockable is just actually good. We've often paid 3 mana for that effect and been mostly fine with it. It's worth noting that unblockable is not as good as flying. Flying is 2 abilities, so again, for newer players who are starting to try and analyze pre-release pools and figuring out, the strategy and trying to win more beyond just kind of having fun at the table, I do think that flying is a better ability than unblockable. Yes, unblockable is more certain to connect. There are still things that can happen to make it not actually deal damage, but the other side of that is flying can make it difficult to block, but also gives it the ability to block creatures with flying, which is often the more relevant side of it. When you have like a 4/4 flyer and you're behind and you play that, that's like a sigh of relief. Now, if that was all unblockable, like you're getting beat down and then by flyers and then you play a 4/4 unblockable, that's not actually going to help you because you're losing the race and you're going to continue losing the race. So that's just one thing to consider. Is unblockable is definitely evasion. That is definitely something, but flying is still, in all likelihood, the best of the evasion. Risen Riptide, 3 mana for a 0/5, but if you've kicked a spell, its base power and toughness become 5/5 until end of turn. I mean, this seems like it's going to be really tough to make work in a pre-release pool. Maybe if you really know what you're doing in draft, you could make this work, but overall this card's probably bad for your health. You're going to have to be playing your kicked spells in your first main phase to get great value out of this. If it's just defensive, it's not super exciting because, if there are many games that it's not going to be worth it for your opponent to swing just because you have the 0/5. So you're talking about being able to turn it into a 5/5. It's like, well, when is that going to be relevant? It's like, well, when it's blocking, but your opponent's basically going to have to be going really wide on you to make that a reasonable thing. So if they have like 3 2/2s and they're just turning them all sideways each turn and you've been blocking with the 0/5, then yes, you're going to get them with your 5/5 trick every once in a while. The other side of that is if they have a 4/4 and you have a 0/5 and that's all that's going on, they're not going to attack into this thing. There's no upside. Best case scenario, you block and it doesn't do any damage. Worst case scenario, they throw their creature right in the trash. So this one's not going to be as tricky as it might seem. But, at common, who knows? Maybe you can get a multiple of these out and play a kicker and just be smashing people savagely. I'm sure that will happen to some people, as this will likely be available as a pretty late pick. Roost of Drakes, again, 1 mana spells all over the place here for blue. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it's an enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you get a 2/2 Drake, and whenever you cast a kicked spell, you get a 2/2 Drake. So really interesting card. You can get for 4 mana a 2/2 Drake with a potential of getting more and more Drakes with every kicker, and the other side of that is just for 1 mana, you can get this thing down and just have all of your kickers do their thing. So I don't know. I think that one's probably going to see some commander play. I don't know that we've got enough good kicker spells to justify constructed play like in standard, but it is a 1 mana spell that can potentially create quite a lot of value. Ruin Crab. I love this card largely because it's not Hedron Crab. Like, they could have taken the easy way out and just printed a Hedron Crab as a reprint, which I would have not enjoyed because that would have demolished the value of that card. This is the type of, reprinting, so to speak, that I actually appreciate. This gives more crabs. Like you can play 8 crab dot deck, be able to have Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab, and just be trying to mill your opponent out. But this doesn't totally demolish Hedron Crab. So I like this printing. That's all I can really say. I really enjoy this card. I think it's mostly Hedron Crab. You don't usually mill yourself out in like a pre-release. In constructed Magic, Hedron Crab is largely used to mill you. So Hedron Crab will mill the controller in order to get stuff like Hogak into play. But this one is going to be just to hit your opponent, and I like the printing. Seagate Restoration. I think we got a commander card here at 7 mana. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. If we know anything, commander players love Reliquary Tower, and they hate having to choose which cards to discard. Tournament players love having that type of problem. Like, if you're discarding cards end of turn, like, as long as you're not land screwed, like, that's usually a great thing. You're probably winning the game. It is no burden to just discard the worst cards in your hand, but casual players do not enjoy that. They love all of their cards, not necessarily equally, but enough that they don't want to discard them, even if they're going to have like 10 cards in hand. 7's not enough, so no maximum hand size, and this can come down as an island if need be. So I don't know what blue deck isn't going to be running this over a basic island. Worst case scenario, you have an island that bolts you, which is in Commander kind of the equivalent of 1.5 damage. Like, it's really not that big a deal starting at 40 life. And the upside on this is pretty significant, especially if you are able to get cards back in hand. I'd like to, playing this along with like Gush and like cards that can return to your hand could make for a pretty massive amount of one-sided card drawing. Seagate Stormcaller, a 2-mana, 2/1. Again, a lot of the draft decks, that is kind of the pawns, so to speak, of the chess game, having those early creatures to be able to press the board and start swinging. If your curve's going to be starting at turn 4 or 5, I mean, you're just going to be run over by 2-power creatures, 3-power creatures. By the time you start to commit that, a single bounce spell, at that point, they're going to be hitting you for like 10 because your blocker's not there. I mean, you really do have to commit to the board early to be successful for the most part in a solid sealed format, which this is shaping up to be. The Stormcaller also has a kicker, and when it enters the battlefield, you copy an instant or sorcery with converted mana cost 2 or less, the next one that you cast, but if it was kicked, you can copy it twice. So this is going to be a commander favorite. I doubt it'll be good enough for Vintage, but man, it would be fun to do this with Time Walk. Just taking 2 extra turns seems really strong. Also seems good with Regrowth to be able to get multiple copies back. I mean, there's a lot of upside to this card, and picking it up and putting it back down is not the hardest thing to do in Commander. I expect this to be something that people have fun with, and Wizards is one of my favorite Commander deck. I actually had a zombie built before people just pretty much politely asked that I stop playing it because it was too good. But Mono Blue Azami is a murderous commander deck that just has all sorts of ways to just end the game, and I think this one might see play in that. I mean, it's a wizard, and that means that you can tap to draw a card with Azami, and I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of spells that I'd be happy to replicate in that deck. Seafloor Stalker, 2 and a blue for a 2/3. But you can also pay some mana here to give it +1/+0. Its as written price is going to be basically 4 mana because this counts as a rogue. So the 4 and a blue is going to go to 3 and a blue right away. But if you have a full party, you're just getting fire breathing and can't be blocked. So this guy actually could do a lot of damage. I would expect many pre-release games to actually end on the back of this guy, period, with both players having like full parties, not really being able to attack, and then this guy for just 1 blue getting +4/+0. +1/+0. Sorry, I misread the card for a second there. Getting fire breathing, as I said earlier. And like for 4 mana, getting +4/+0, turning sideways and just clocking your opponent very quickly. Shell Shield, 1 blue, with a kicker of 2. So we're going to pay 1 or 2 mana for this spell. It gives a creature +0/+3, or if you kicked it, it also gives it hexproof. Boy, I feel like we've had this spell literally at 1 blue to just give a creature +0/+3 and hexproof. So, I mean, this one, not really loving. I generally like my combat tricks to give a bonus to attack to allow your cheaper creatures to trade up with larger, more expensive creatures. You can kind of analyze Magic as a war of mana costs, which when you're trading a 2 mana creature for a 4 mana creature, you're kind of winning. It's not exact, it doesn't map perfectly, but that is a useful way to try and think. It's a low resolution tool to try and better understand the game, and it's just not a lot of times where that's going to play out in this way. This is mostly going to be, you've got a 2/2, they've got a 2/2, you offer the trade, or they swing into you. Either way, a trade is being offered, and instead of trading the creature, then a spell from turn gets traded. Selundi's Vision, 2 and a blue. Look at the top 6 of your library. You can take an instant or sorcery from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom. It's an instant, or it can come down as a land. This card, if it was a common, I think this would actually see a bunch of play in Pauper. This card seems fine. I wouldn't be surprised if this sees play in Constructed and Standard. And again, the question for Commander is going to be, is this better than just your 25th island or however many you're playing in like your mono blue deck? And it may be. It may not be. Coming into play tapped is a very significant drawback, but running less lands is a very significant bonus. Skyclave Plunder, 4 and a blue, where you look at the top X of your library, where X is 3 plus the number of creatures in your party, then put 3 of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom. So for 5 mana, you're going to draw 3, or you're going to potentially look at up to 7 cards and then get 3 out of it. So this is like a more fairly costed dig through time treasure cruise hybrid, and it's a type of card that I generally enjoy. The sorcery speed is obviously nowhere near as good as this being an instant. The formula of drawing cards during your opponent's end step is a tried and tested formula for victory, but here, it may be worth the trade-off. I don't know that I'd play this happily in a pre-release pool, as, if you're behind, then you're still behind the turn you play this. And if you're ahead, you're kind of potentially winning anyways. So not exactly the type of card that I'd be excited to sleeve up in Limited. Skyclave Squid, a 2 mana 3/2 with Defender. Here we actually have some landfall for blue. It can attack as though it didn't have Defender if you hit your land drop. This is probably going to be able to attack on like turn 3, 4, 5 pretty reliably. As the game goes on, those lands are going to be more sparse, and you're probably not going to be as excited about this. Probably going to look to get in some attacks early and then potentially trade it off down the line. Surefoot Initiator, 4 mana, 2/3. Tap another untapped rogue you control so it can't be blocked this turn, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Yeah, not bad. Not bad. 4 mana Ophidian that actually deals some damage. This is a card that I can get behind. Tapping another rogue is not inconsequential. But outdrawing your opponent 2-1 is pretty difficult to come back from. Tazim Royal Mage, 2 mana, 2/1. Again, solid stats here. We're going to be able to commit this to the board early, or we're going to be able to play the kicker and return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. From what we've seen, this feels like this may end up pairing better with other colors. The ability to get back removal is very, very solid, and this is the type of card that you can play early without much regret, and then also later in the game potentially get back a key piece of removal to get rid of your opponent's best creature, or perhaps even steal their best creature. Thieving Skydiver, 1 of the blue for a 2/1. The kicker cannot be 0, but it is going to be X. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target artifact with a converted mana cost X or less. If the artifact is an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So I think they actually might have thought about vintage with this one. I mean, X being 0 on this would make it a really, really filthy vintage card. The ability to just steal your opponent's moxes with a 2/1 flyer for 2, like, holy crap. This would make Merfolk just like so good in vintage. As it is, you got to pay the extra 1 if you're going to be stealing 0 casting cost artifacts. So, I mean, I guess I'm just glad they didn't put that clause on there. This card would have been miserable to play against. Might have actually had me playing like a aggro Merfolk tribal deck with like 4 Force, a negation, 4 Force, a will, and just this guy, some Lords of Atlantis, True Name Nemesis, maybe Phantasmal Images. I mean, there would have been a deck there, but as it is, it's fine. You're going to have fun with this. Stealing your opponent's mana rocks in Commander, certainly going to be worth the extra couple of mana. And overall, I mean, I think this card's actually great in Limited. A 2-power flyer for 2 is very, very good. And if you're playing blue, you're definitely going to be sleeving that up at the pre-release. Umara Wizard, 4 and a blue for a 4/3. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, it gets flying until end of turn, and also can come in as a land. This one feels pretty playable to me. The ability, especially if you're in draft, you're going to have more control over this than you are in your pre-release. But I can imagine decks being able to fuel this to be able to attack repeatedly with flying, which is an awful lot to handle. 4 power in the air is quite a lot. And the 3 toughness is, I mean, it's not 4. Like, you're still going to get traded with a few of the creatures that we've seen so far with wings, but you're going to be much larger than many of them. Wind Rider Wizard, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 flyer. And whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard, you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Again, kind of fitting more into the idea that blue seems like it's going to be happier discarding its lands with these looting abilities than it is to be using them to get those landfall triggers, which we have just not as many of, it would seem, as other colors. Zulaport Duelist, 1 blue for a 1/1 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, up to 1 creature gets -2, -0 until end of turn. Then its controller mills 2 cards. We'll see if there's any other mill. I don't feel like this doesn't feel to me like the mill strategy is going to be super strong. I think the only formats where I've really liked mill a lot have had creatures that repeatedly mill your opponent, so they can actually interact in combat, but they can also mill your opponent. Or like, for example, in Modern Masters, where you had splice effects, where you could be splicing on mill effects, so you just were able to repeatedly do it every turn. This mill stuff doesn't really feel to me like it's going to be strong enough to be an actual win condition. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Are you going to be trying mill at the pre-release, or is this just something that people are going to try and be filled with regret at not being able to actually win a game with mill? That is all of them for blue. We will be back with all of the colors. Thanks for watching. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.